why falling inflation still feels like a financial crisis. Inflation is falling. That's what the headlines say, what central banks repeat, what charts proudly display. The numbers suggest relief, progress, a return to normal. But for millions of people around the world, nothing feels normal at all. Rent still devours most of the paycheck. Groceries still trigger hesitation at checkout. Utilities, transport, insurance, services, none of them seem to have gotten the memo. The cost of living feels relentless, unchanged, even as analysts speak of stability. So here's the real question, the one that quietly haunts everyday life. If inflation is falling, why do you still feel broke? This isn't about mindset. It isn't poor budgeting, laziness, or financial ignorance. It's something structural, mathematical, and deeply psychological. And once you understand it, you'll realize this feeling wasn't accidental. It was almost inevitable. Here's where it gets interesting. When economists say inflation is falling, they're talking about the rate of change, not the absolute level. Prices aren't going down, they're just rising more slowly. That distinction sounds technical, but it's everything. If prices surge quickly and then inflation slows, the damage doesn't reverse. The higher price level becomes permanent. Groceries don't roll back. Rent doesn't apologize. Insurance premiums don't quietly undo themselves. They stick. So when people hear inflation is down and expect relief, what they get instead is confusion. Inflation measures speed, but people live with levels, and levels are what hurt. Think of it like this. If a car accelerates violently and then slows down, the distance it traveled doesn't shrink. You're still far from where you started. That's how inflation worked over the last few years. Prices surged, then stabilized at a higher plateau. Falling inflation just means the climb isn't as steep anymore. It doesn't mean you've come back down. And that's the first reason this feels like a lie. Not because the data is fake, but because it answers a different question than the one people are asking. But even that isn't the full story. Because the inflation numbers themselves don't fully reflect how life actually feels. Inflation is calculated using a basket of goods and services: food, energy, housing, transportation, healthcare, entertainment. But that basket isn't fixed. It changes. When steak becomes expensive, the model assumes you buy chicken. When brand names spike, it assumes you switch to generic. When housing costs rise fast, those increases are averaged and smoothed over time. This is called substitution. On paper, it makes sense. In real life, it feels like a quiet downgrade. You didn't get richer. You adapted downward. Your lifestyle shrank, but the data calls that stability. The numbers say you adjusted. Your body knows you compromised. Take the example of housing. It's one of the largest expenses for the average person. In many major cities, rent has climbed so high it feels like there's no end in sight. You hear, inflation is down, while your landlord just raised the rent again. That's not inflation going away. That's inflation becoming a permanent feature of life. Renters feel this most acutely, but it's not just them. Homebuyers face skyrocketing mortgage rates as they try to lock in a loan. With housing prices high and wages lagging, the dream of owning a home feels more distant than ever. And if you think that's a unique problem, look to other major cities. Whether it's New York, London, or Sydney, housing inflation is a global issue. A silent force reshaping what it means to own and live. And then there's the kind of inflation people feel the most, the one that doesn't show up cleanly in monthly shopping lists. Asset inflation, housing prices, education costs, healthcare, stocks. These aren't things you buy every week, but they shape your entire future. When assets inflate faster than wages, it doesn't just make things expensive, it makes them inaccessible. The ladder moves higher while you're still climbing. This is why younger generations don't compare today's prices to last year. They compare access to 5 or 10 years ago. Can I own a home? Can I start a family without financial panic? Can I save without falling behind? Inflation didn't just raise prices, it raised barriers. This is where it gets interesting. We often talk about how inflation hits consumers, but for those in the financial markets, the impact can be completely different. For investors and asset holders, inflation might seem like a distant inconvenience, a mild inconvenience at best. But when you consider the fact that markets and real estate often rise alongside inflation, it becomes clear, if you own assets, inflation can work in your favor. The same forces that make life harder for most people make the rich get richer. Investors see their assets appreciate. Debtors see the real value of their debt shrink. Savers holding cash lose quietly, slowly, invisibly. This isn't a conspiracy. It's just how a debt-based system functions. Modern economies rely on credit, spending, and growth. Moderate inflation helps erode debt and encourages money to move. But it also transfers wealth from savers to borrowers, from workers to owners, from the future to the present. That transfer is why the economy can recover while people don't. Psychology makes this even worse. Even if prices stopped rising tomorrow, many people would still feel poor because expectations have shifted. Once your baseline changes, it doesn't feel temporary. It feels permanent. Your brain recalibrates what safety feels like, what risk feels like, what enough looks like. This is called reference dependence. You aren't reacting to today's prices. You're reacting to the loss of yesterday's comfort. And loss always hurts more than gain feels good. That's why cheaper electronics don't offset more expensive rent. You don't feel richer buying a cheaper TV. You feel poorer paying more just to exist. There's also a quiet shift happening beneath the surface. Services are getting more expensive than goods. Haircuts, repairs, childcare, medical visits. These are labor-intensive, and once prices rise, they rarely fall. When wages rise in service sectors, those costs stick. This creates a world where everyday life feels expensive, even when headline inflation cools. Goods might stabilize, services define survival, and services don't come back down. This is the part that the inflation numbers just don't capture. Official inflation might say the situation is improving, but for the average person, the cost of living remains unbearable. Housing, energy, healthcare. These essential services never seem to go down in price, and often they increase disproportionately. In emerging markets, the inflation feels even worse. People living in South Africa, Brazil, or India are seeing their daily expenses spike because of currency devaluation, rising global commodity prices, and local economic turbulence. These people aren't just dealing with headline inflation, they're dealing with economic instability on multiple fronts. Debt is another crucial piece of the puzzle. During periods of high inflation, many households relied on credit to survive. Credit cards, buy now, pay later schemes, longer auto loans, and personal lines of credit. When inflation slows but interest rates remain high, that debt becomes heavier, not lighter. Monthly payments don't fall, they linger. Financial pressure remains. The crisis doesn't end, it changes shape. This is why misunderstanding inflation is so damaging. People internalize systemic outcomes as personal failure. They think they did something wrong, that everyone else figured it out, that they fell behind because they weren't smart or disciplined enough. But the truth is simpler and harsher. The system adjusted, and you absorbed the cost. Feeling broke in a world of cooling inflation isn't irrational, it's logical. The system stabilized before people did. And unless wages outpace prices for a sustained period, not just match them but exceed them, most people won't feel real relief. Historically, that takes time, sometimes decades. This isn't pessimism, it's clarity. Understanding this doesn't magically fix the problem, but it removes the shame. You're not broken. Your expectations weren't unrealistic. The math just changed faster than your life could adapt. Inflation didn't just raise prices, it reset reality. And until systems, wages, and access catch up, falling inflation will remain a headline, not a solution. Because when numbers improve before lives do, relief feels theoretical, and theory doesn't pay rent. If this video helped you understand the real story behind inflation and why it feels different than what the headlines say, make sure to hit subscribe and join Money Hub for more deep dives into the financial forces shaping your life. Comment below with your experience. Do you feel richer or poorer as inflation falls? Sharing your story helps us uncover the truth behind the numbers. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly breakdowns of the economy, markets, and hidden financial trends. This is Money Hub.